So in this week's video, I'm sharing when to apologize and when not to apologize in relationships so you don't become a doormat and create more problems later. But if you're new, my name's Michelle Ferris. I'm a psychotherapist and I love helping people create relationships that work. So there are a lot of reasons why you may be apologizing even though you haven't done anything wrong. And that's what we're going to talk about in this video. Plus, I'm going to tell you exactly when you should be apologizing and when you shouldn't, because that's going to help keep your relationships healthy. So the first reason you may be apologizing is to avoid conflict. And this is really common if you grew up in a dysfunctional family where there was a lot of conflict, there was abuse, there was maybe even rage. So you learned that conflict was scary. So whenever a conversation gets tense, you start to feel anxious. And the first thing you do is apologize to see if you can smooth everything out and calm things down. You may also be assuming the worst because it's a childhood trigger where you think a conflict is going to lead to abuse even if it doesn't. But really, that's false evidence appearing real, where we assume that the worst is going to happen even when it most likely won't. So another reason you might be apologizing is that you can't stand when someone else is upset with you. You'll do absolutely anything to avoid it. And apologizing is one of those things you do to get them off your back and to make sure that they're not mad at you. This also can trace back to childhood where if you were blamed a lot, you may assume that other people are mad at you even when they're not. Maybe they shoot you a glance or they get quiet and you immediately think that they're mad versus that they might just be having a bad day. So if this is you, I want you to say me too in the comments. You're not alone. Childhood triggers can often cause us to want to apologize and appease the situation instead of taking care of ourselves. So you also might be apologizing as a way to show empathy or make somebody else feel better. And this isn't necessarily unhealthy. If you say something like, I'm really sorry that you're hurting, or I'm so sorry that that happened to you. But it's not healthy when you apologize and make yourself wrong for it. That is what we want to avoid whenever we're doing an apology. So another reason why you may be apologizing is to try to control a situation and prevent it from escalating. This is really common, especially if you have a family member that is intoxicated or is raging, because part of what happens when we do that is we're trying to control the uncontrollable, and it can often escalate that person's emotions and create a more dangerous situation, and I don't want that for you. So another reason you may be apologizing is that you tend to feel guilty and take responsibility for what's gone wrong in a situation. You feel bad when something happens, even though you didn't cause it. You want to step in and fix it and make it all better because you most likely have a hard time sitting with discomfort, letting other people have their consequences. And that's a huge part of having healthy relationships, is letting somebody else experience the consequences of their own choices. This can often happen with narcissistic people or alcoholics who are actively drinking because they want to avoid accountability and make you wrong for it. So you stepping in and apologizing goes right along with what they want you to do. If you find that happening, I want you to stop and ask yourself, why do you feel guilty? What is coming up for you? Do some journaling around that, because I guarantee you're probably feeling guilty for a lot of other reasons that may have nothing to do with what's presently happening. You may just be feeling responsible for somebody else's pain, and that may be going back to childhood. Or you might be feeling like you can't tolerate somebody else's suffering because you can't tolerate your own suffering. These are all issues of codependency that you might want to explore if this one fits. Another reason you might be apologizing is you're apologizing because the other person won't. So you're hoping that they'll actually join in and say, I'm sorry too. This one almost never happens because people who avoid accountability and never say they're sorry see it as a sign of weakness. So you setting the positive example isn't necessarily going to change that. So when should you apologize? The simple answer is when you've done something to apologize for. But if you're not sure, here are a few suggestions. I want you to consider apologizing when somebody is really upset at you. When you notice something is wrong in the relationship, maybe somebody's pulling away, they're not calling you anymore, they're not responding to your texts, those are some indicators that something's changed in the relationship. So what do you do then? Think about what could you have possibly said or done, even though it was unintentional, that could have caused hurt feelings on the other end. Because sometimes we don't realize how we come across. Maybe you told a joke and it landed wrong, or you gave some unsolicited advice and they didn't like it. So what I want you to do is I want you to think back and see if you noticed anything that changed. Any conversation you had where the other person had a reaction, even if they didn't say anything, you could see their facial expression change. Or you could notice them getting quiet or ending the conversation abruptly. Those are some signs that could indicate an apology may be needed. So if you're not sure, ask them. Just say, hey, is there anything up between us? I noticed something's changed or something's a little different. And wait for your answer. Because often just asking them the question is a good icebreaker to open up the discussion where they might say, yeah, you know what, our last conversation didn't feel good to me, and here's why. That's what you want. You actually want the other person to be able to say yes or no. Now, if they say no and you still feel like something's wrong, that's when you may have to just let it go, because we can't chase people to find out if anything's wrong, because sometimes we might be assuming that they're mad at us when really they have other things going on that may have nothing to do with you. So now let's talk about when not to apologize. I don't want you to apologize when somebody is blaming or gaslighting you, making you wrong in any way. That is not the time to apologize to try to appease them. That's the time I want you to consider practicing detachment and even leaving the room. Because when somebody's blaming you or gaslighting you, which basically means they're making you doubt your reality, that's actually the time for you to remove yourself, because I don't want you to stay and take that kind of treatment. Another example of when I don't want you to apologize is when you feel bad when someone else is hurting or has done something wrong. That is not your responsibility. If somebody has made a mistake and it's just hard for you to sit with it, you might need to remove yourself and do some self-care, because trying to remove somebody else's pain is taking away their consequences and their ability to learn and grow. I want you to be able to let somebody else have their consequences and not always rush in to try to make them feel better, because that helps them avoid accountability. Instead, you could just take some deep breaths and say to yourself, this is not my problem to fix, because most likely it's not. So another example of when I don't want you to apologize is when you're trying to make the other person feel better. And this one happens a lot if you've been in conflict with somebody. Maybe you've had a difficult discussion and you feel really uncomfortable, so you immediately revert back to apologizing because you think that'll make it all better. The problem with that is that it really lets the other person off the hook for looking at their own behavior. And that just creates more of a toxic relationship, and I don't want that for you. Because when we try to make somebody else feel better by apologizing, we're really preventing their own growth. Because sometimes, even in those difficult conversations, we can learn something about ourselves. I think there's a lot of value to just hold steady, take a breath, and be quiet. Apologizing when you haven't done anything wrong doesn't serve a purpose. It may feel like a good band-aid in the heat of the moment, but it doesn't last. Now, the next thing I want you to do is I want you to go watch my video on how to make an amends, because that's your next step. Thanks so much.